Dr. Asha Tribble, and I work within the Department of Homeland Security as the FEMA Emergency Management Agency's Deputy Regional Administrator for the Region 9 office, which covers California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories. In this video, I'll highlight some of the ways changes in our climate can impact the national security posture of the United States. We continue to learn more about how climate change affects economic prosperity, public health and safety, and international stability. We also know now that climate change poses a significant and growing threat to national security. For discussion purposes, let me frame the two terms that are the focus of this segment. Climate change refers to detectable changes in one or more of the climate system components over multiple decades. And national security refers to the protection of the nation and people, interests, and the way of life. So think of this as any action or outcome that would enhance or degrade one of the elements of U.S. national power. This could be economic, military, or geopolitical power. Before we go further, let's review the history to understand how we came to realize the link between climate change and national security. Dr. Spencer Weert, former professor at University of Maryland, does a great job summarizing the political history of climate change. In 1947, World War II had ended, the Cold War had begun, and the White House National Security Council was created. At that time, federally funded research was largely focused on the Cold War. The 1960s and 70s were marked with increasing public concern due to environmental disasters, such as 3 Mile Island, toxic water in the Love Canal, and the Santa Barbara oil spill. It is fitting that during this time, federal science agencies like the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, were created, and research funding for the environment, including climate change, increased. During the 1980s, however, the funding and the science itself became the topic of political battles between those entities for and against environmental regulation, and that battle lives on today. For more than 30 years, there have been rigorous research and modeling efforts among the top scientists in the world to understand climate change and to warn on its projected impacts. The difference now is that they have been able to refine and downscale the information to specific sectors and regions, as well as suggest mitigation and adaptation strategies. Although the subject of climate change continues to be met with political discourse, the federal government has long acknowledged the consequences of inaction. In 2001, around the time of the release of the first U.S. National Climate Assessment and third report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, then President Bush said, "The issue of climate change respects no border. Its effects cannot be reined in by any army, nor advanced by any ideology. Climate change, with its potential to impact every corner of the world, is an issue that must be addressed by the world." In 2008, Thomas Finger, chairman of the National Intelligence Council under President Bush, said in his testimony, "Global climate change will have wide-ranging implications for U.S. national security interests over the next 20 years. In 2014, a report from the federally funded Center for Naval Analyses concluded the nature and pace of observed climate changes and emerging scientific consensus on their projected consequences pose severe risks for our national security. During our decades of experience in the U.S. military, we have addressed many national security challenges, from containment and deterrence of the Soviet nuclear threat during the Cold War, to political extremism and transnational terrorism in recent years. The national security risks of projected climate change are as serious as any challenges we have faced. In 2015, Dr. Susan Rice, President Obama's national security advisor, said in a speech at Stanford, climate change is a direct threat to the prosperity and safety of the American people. The link between climate change and national security has been made, so now we'll dive a little deeper to understand how. Let's review some specific climate change impacts and think through how these impacts can become national security concerns. Sea level rise is occurring and projected to continue where significant critical infrastructure and military installations are positioned along the coast. The vulnerability of forests is projected to increase due to longer fire seasons, infestation, and disease outbreaks. Where otherwise, a healthy forest provides opportunities to reduce future climate change by capturing and storing carbon. Heavy rainfall can impact water quality due to increased pollutant loads and disruptions to water treatment facilities. Drought can reduce water availability, increasing competition for water. Climate change can lead to conditions that promote the spread of infectious disease. These outbreaks, especially in high-density areas, have the potential to take major populations out of work, slow an economy, stress the healthcare system, and cause tension over availability of vaccines. Finally, we are observing a decline in Arctic sea ice, and the trend is expected to continue. And while this leads to all kinds of natural resource exploration, shipping, and tourism opportunities, the geopolitical landscape in the region is complex and tenuous at best. Taken individually at a particular location in the U.S., you might not think of any one of these threats as an impact to national security. But I would argue that almost all climate change impacts have the potential to cascade into national security concerns. Let's face it, we live in an interconnected world where our systems depend on one another. For example, a loss of power can quickly cascade into degradation of other critical services, like communications and fuel production. The Center for Naval Analyses report suggests, as coastal regions become increasingly populated and developed, more frequent or severe storms will threaten vulnerable populations in these areas and increase requirements for emergency responders, including the military. Simultaneous or widespread extreme weather events or wildfires, accompanied by mass evacuations and degraded critical infrastructure, could outstrip local and federal government resources and require increased use of the military and the private sector. Just consider the resources needed to respond to Hurricane Sandy, which was only one storm in one part of the country. Next, imagine a scenario where heavy, prolonged precipitation caused by major flooding across the Southern California coast, rendering two of the top container ports in the world inoperable and impairing surrounding transportation networks. Now let's consider today's just-in-time logistics used by major commercial retailers. Degraded port operations and transportation networks over any length of time can lead to a rapid supply chain crisis across the U.S., leading to shortages of critical goods and a volatile marketplace in major city centers. Unfortunately, we cannot with great certainty pinpoint when or where these high consequence impacts may occur, their severity or duration, whether they will coincide with other impacts, or whether the U.S. will experience a 12-month hurricane, fire, or severe weather season. But dealing with uncertainty is nothing new for the United States. Our military addresses challenges with imperfect or conflicting information all of the time. FEMA deploys resources to potential disaster areas, often based on imperfect forecasts. Our current challenge is to determine where to invest limited resources and how to build capacity to become resilient in the face of climate change. We must continue to educate the masses, coordinate and prioritize investments to buy down risk, and incorporate climate change science and projections into our policies, plans, and doctrine.